Hello, everyone. It's Larry Johnson, your host for A Principal's Voices. And we have a real treat today for you. One of my very good friends, Russell James, and I are going to be talking about biblical parameters of fundraising. Now, that's my term, not his, but he'll give you the correct version of it. Those of you who don't know Russell, he is a professor at Texas Tech University, and he is, in my view, the most insightful researcher in the area of philanthropy and fundraising that I've ever seen. I mean, he's bar one. And Russell, you just don't get the big head. That's all I ask. And so, but he and I think a lot alike, but he brings with it the depth of understanding that really confirms some of the instincts that I have. And it's always a pleasure to have him here. Russell, welcome.
Well, thanks so much, Larry. It's great to be here and appreciate that kind introduction. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, you're good at what you do, and I think giving credit where credit is due is now. Let me tell you something that happened last week, and
Okay.
I want to know if you've ever had anything like this too.
Hmm.
Um, you probably know that you and I consider myself in this category too. We're rather contrary thinkers in the world of philanthropy. I think
Sure.
we'd fit that category. Well, I had a Zoom call with a gentleman that made arrangements to speak with me last week, and all my stuff has a link to arrange a time to talk to me. So you never know what you're going to get sometimes.
Yeah.
And so this man was speaking with me, and he's very interested in using our training platform. But that
Great.
wasn't the real point. He said,
Hmm.
"So you know that." You're very different from anybody else in terms of your approach is so different. And I said, well, yeah, I do. I'm kind of out there. And then he said, when did you get your aha moment
Hmm.
that you knew that it wasn't like the conventional wisdom? I'm adding those words. But he said,
Sure.
when did you get your aha moment? Well, that was at both startling and gratifying at the same time that
Yeah.
I'd said, okay, yeah, there is here. This is another point of view. Well, what I said to him was, I said, well, it wasn't going to classes. It wasn't doing any of that sort of thing. It's
Hmm.
for me, it was the result of 35 years of working with high net worth people.
Hmm.
That's what
Hmm.
it is. I learned what they're like, what they respond to, what's really going on here. And that's what it was. So, but
Hmm.
have you ever had anything like that? Like, when did you figure this out, Russell? Did anyone said that to you?
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example that's a little bit like that. A few years ago, the IRS changed its data sharing policies. I know that doesn't sound exciting to you, but as a researcher, it was super exciting because it meant that we could access in a machine readable format all of the IRS Form 990s, which allowed us to track all of the nonprofits that were filing these IRS Form 990s in the country in terms of their fundraising, their contributions coming in the door, and really look at those longer term trends. So we did an analysis of a little over 1 million nonprofit tax returns. And bottom line example of a finding is if we're looking at organizations, and here we're looking at those that are raising at least $1 million a year, up to the very biggest ones. If those organizations were getting all of their gifts as cash, then during that 5 year period, on average, their contributions growth was a total of 11%, which was the same as the inflation rate over that 5 year period. But if the organizations were also receiving gifts of securities, for example, or other major non-cash gifts, their growth rate was not 11% over the period, it was 66%. Now, this was a big deal because this wasn't some just so story or some little experiment. This is the universe of nonprofit fundraising organizations in the country. And we're not just getting a little impact, it was a 6 times greater impact. And of course, this relates to ideas of talking about gifts of assets, talking about wealth sharing. But here was the aha moment. The aha moment was at some point thinking about the New Testament. What were they giving in the New Testament? Well, we see things like in Acts 2:45, they would sell their property and possessions, two different Greek words, or from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them. That's in Acts 4:35. Well, those are actually four different Greek words for assets. But we see even more than that. In Acts 4 26, we've got Joseph, called Barnabas. He owned a tract of land, and so he sold it. Right? Mary of Bethany had an alabaster vial of very expensive perfume worth a year's wages. So these are six different examples of gifts that are all gifts of assets. They're not
Non-cash.
disposable income sharing. They're not cash. Now, look, disposable income sharing is great, wonderful stuff. But six different times we get these examples of no, this is wealth sharing, this is asset sharing. So that to me was a bit of the aha, or you might like to put it this way, that God likes to laugh at me, that I take, all of this time to analyze all of these tax returns, come up with this result and publish it, and very excited about that, and then sort of get this aha moment of, well, congratulations, you've discovered something that's 2,000 years old. If you were paying attention, I already said this. So that's a bit of my aha
it's
moment.
it's like Russell saying, it's like God saying to you, well, Russell, you finally figured it out. You know, good for you, young man.
Exactly.
It's that God is always the majority partner in any of these relationships, and he's pretty patient to most people. Well, this whole idea, first of all, of seeking assets and cash is going to come, but seeking assets takes focus and direction. It's what we tell people when they come to do the eight principles training. It's that
Mhm,
if you can create a pathway for your investors where
mhm,
they and I call it an emotional pathway, where they'll
mhm.
begin to make gifts of assets. This is where you get your serious growth.
Yes.
um, it also becomes much more what I would say inflation proof and economic proof growth.
Sure. Sure.
And the empirical reason for that is if people are giving assets, they're with you. They
Hmm.
are in the tank with you. They're
Hmm.
not just handing out 50 extra dollars they had this month because there was no other place to put it. And see, let's get into. I want to talk. I'm you're aware of more of this than I am, but let's look at philanthropy in the Jewish world and in the Christian world.
Okay.
um, in the Christian world, which I think it also applies in the Jewish world, we're told that donors should give their gifts secretly or at least without fanfare. That it's not let the left hand know what the right hand is
Hmm.
doing, and
Hmm.
then we're told that when the gifts are given, the nonprofit should make a big deal of it by putting the spotlight on the donors. You
Hmm.
see. And I was told by a good friend who's an Orthodox Jew that there's seven levels to Jewish philanthropy. And the top one, he gave the Yiddish word for it, and I won't
Hmm.
even begin to try to repeat it, but it's where only you and God know.
Hmm.
That's it, the ultimate giving.
Hmm.
Yet, here's the contrary thing. How many nonprofits, well meaning nonprofits, are always trying to put the spotlight on the donor?
Hmm.
And we're told not to put the spotlight on the donor. And that includes, you know, faith-based organizations as well as secular organizations. So that's sort of what I know about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, so let me jump into that because this is a common area where we see this distinction or this difference. And it's really important because I think it comes from an area of confusion, really just based upon different words. What do I mean by that? Well, in the Bible, different gifts have different rules, right? We know that from the Old Testament. We don't mix and match the rules with the gifts, but that's also true in the New Testament. There's actually two different kinds of giving described in the New Testament, which, if you read it in the Greek, is doesn't look anything at all alike. So we have one kind of giving that you might call almsgiving. That's giving down. The word is eleemosune. It means mercy, pity, or alms. So, for example, in Acts 3, when you've got the man who had been unable to walk from birth, was set down in front of the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful. He was there to beg. And what was he begging for? Eleemosune, right? and that's when Peter and John came by. He's asking to receive eleemosune. That's the word that Jesus uses when he says, "Don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing." And that's how we should engage in almsgiving. But there's a completely different set of charitable gifts in the New Testament that is koinonia sharing. Now, koinonia in the New Testament, that's the Greek word for the fellowship community. And so that's the church, that's the fellowship community. And so this kind of giving, this koinonia giving or sharing across, so this is not giving down, this is sharing across with the person who's also themselves going to be sharing what they have, kind of mutual sharing. It's actually done in exactly the opposite way. So, for example, in 2 Corinthians 8:24, Paul instructs those who are going to make this gift, therefore, openly before the churches, show them the proof of your love and our reason for boasting about you. And actually, Paul didn't even wait for the donors to be open about it because he publicized it even before. So in 2 Corinthians 9, 2 through 4, he says, I have been boasting to the churches of Macedonia that you in Greece were ready to send an offering a year ago. In fact, it was your enthusiasm that stirred up many of the Macedonian believers to begin giving. I don't want to be wrong in my boasting about you. We would be embarrassed, not to mention your own embarrassment, if some Macedonian believers came with me and found that you weren't ready after all I had told them. So here's Paul, who is doing the extreme opposite, where he's massively publicizing the intention to give and then publicizing the gifts of the Macedonians. But it turns out that's nothing new, that ministry donors have always been named individually. We know about Mary and Joanna and Susanna from Luke 8. We know about Barnabas from Acts 4. We know about Phoebe from Romans 16. So the main point is to understand that the confusion comes from misunderstanding that koinonia sharing is not the same, which is sharing across, is not the same as giving down, almsgiving, or eleemosune. So the notion here is that you don't want to mix and match these rules with these gifts. Begging is what pairs with almsgiving. It actually does literally in Acts, but major gift fundraising is not normally almsgiving or giving down. It's not eleemosune. It is this mutual sharing across. So I like to
What
tell fundraisers this, that if it feels like begging, you're doing it wrong. That's the wrong kind of gift.
mhm. What about the gift of assets where the patron wants to remain anonymous?
Well, certainly that's fine, but it is the case that when we look at this koinonia sharing in the New Testament, it's universally, and in fact, Paul directs it to be open. And the reason that it is open is because it inspires other members of this mutual
Hmm.
sharing community to themselves share from whatever God has blessed them with. So it is something that is very much contrary to our common expectations or modern culture. But when we actually look at it, that's what the words say. And beyond that, we also have the historical record. When we look at, for example, the very oldest purpose-built church building. Now, obviously, the very first ones were just houses that were used in that way. But when we get to purpose built church buildings, what do we have in them? We have repeated donor inscriptions. This was the person that paid for the tile floor. This was the person that paid for the communion table. And so that is from at least the earliest historical record we have after the New Testament. It's matching what we see in the New Testament, which is, Paul saying, hey, openly before the churches, show them the proof of your love, and being very open about these kinds of gifts.
Well, the Jewish community is similar in the terms of the naming opportunities in synagogues and what have you. Oh, they name everything, everything.
Well, and that's nothing new. That's also the case. So, one of the things to keep in mind is that when Jesus was teaching in the synagogues, when Paul would have been teaching in the synagogues, they were literally surrounded by donor inscriptions. I mean, we
Mm.
know that as part of the archaeological record because that some of those still exist today, and so that is. this notion of understanding that in the same way, when right after Jesus is saying, when you are engaging in almsgiving, eleemosene, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. He's also saying, let your good works shine before others so that that they will see them. Well, this concept of good works in the ministry to the rich that's described in 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19. That's the same phrase that's used to describe this sharing, this giving. The impact of that giving is to create those kind of good works that Jesus directed should be done openly in front of others so that they may see them.
Well, that works unless the donor has a motive for self-aggrandizement, that their goal is to be known. Their goal is, look at me, look at what I'm doing, look at what I'm providing. That kind of perverts the honesty of it in some ways. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good point. It's actually brought out by that same passage, the First Timothy 6:17 through 19. And the contrast is this: some people will use wealth to be high-minded, right? That's the notion of being above the fellowship community. And it's very specific in saying that's not who you are. That's not the kind of person you are. You're not separating yourself from the fellowship community by being above it or being high-minded. Instead, you're using wealth as a way to connect with the fellowship community. That's the koinonia sharing. So it's the idea of we are sharing in an open way, encouraging others to share from whatever God has richly blessed them with. So the notion is the goal is to inspire others to behave in the same manner. Even though we're all blessed differently, we all behave the same way. We all share together with whatever we've been richly blessed together. But if we're doing it just to sort of show that we're above the fellowship community, then that's the opposite effect. That's not
okay,
supporting and connecting with the
okay.
fellowship community.
So I'm just looking, reviewing my history here, working with a lot of donors, many of them Christian people.
Mhm.
And I'd say most of those people are pretty modest.
Mhm.
I mean, a few have outright wanted to be anonymous.
Sure.
Others are willing to be known, but
Mhm.
they don't really want to be applauded.
Right.
Um, and
So the motivation, and tell me how this matches with your experience. The motivation here is not tell everybody about how wonderful I am. The motivation is if you allow us to share your story, it could be really powerful in inspiring other gifts and other people to join in this cause or in this project. And I think that's more commonly the motivation that gets people to be willing to allow their story of their gift to be shared. I don't know. How does that fit with your experience?
well, it's certainly what I was taught, that a principal motivator is seeing someone else do something similar.
Mhm.
And that when there have been people who are reluctant to be known, I'll say, well, you're a part of a big project here, and your investment can be quite a motivator in enabling others to step forward. And
Mhm.
if it's put forward that way,
Mhm.
typically people will say okay, but then you have to
Mhm.
keep faith with them.
Mhm.
And I've seen a number of situations where the nonprofit thinks they're doing the donor a favor, and they're not, because then they begin to, brass bands, electric
Mhm.
lights,
Mhm.
this kind of thing that embarrasses the donor.
Mhm.
And so that's it's just interesting, Russell, that you draw that distinction. Um, so now, are you aware of the seven levels of Jewish
Sure.
philanthropy?
Sure.
Okay. Can you comment on those? Because all I know is the top one and the bottom one, I think.
Yeah, and again, the thing to keep in mind is that when we read something like that, very influential, very powerful, but don't think of Jewish philanthropy or Jewish organizations or Jewish culture as a monolith. because it's not. So you
Hmm.
do have a variety of different approaches within that context. So what I'm saying with that is that what we see in the New Testament is basically just splitting those two things apart and
Hmm.
saying these are two different things. They're both good things. Almsgiving, giving down. How do you do that? Well, you should not be public with that. I mean, in fact, it can even sort of take dignity away from the recipient when you're sort of
Hmm.
publicly giving down in front of other people. Don't do that kind of giving that way, right? This other kind of giving, the sharing with the fellowship community, that koinonia sharing, not the ele masune giving, that is done with essentially opposite rules. This is why we do it publicly, exactly the way that Paul used it, which is, hey, you made this commitment. I went and told all these other people about your commitment to motivate them. And then they made this big gift. Now I'm telling you about their big gift to motivate you. In fact, I'm going to bring some of them with me. And wouldn't you be embarrassed if, right? I mean, that's some
Oh,
pretty
well,
extreme
well,
behavior.
we'll leave it to St. Paul to put the pressure on. He was quite good at that. He was quite good at that.
So
Um,
I guess compared to saying these are at higher levels, the New Testament is more saying these are two different things. So
mhm.
that highest level, the idea of almsgiving that is completely secret, that's one type of giving. And so it doesn't sort of structure them as that's better. It just says that's different. There's two different kinds of giving, and they're done in these different ways.
Okay, well, that's fascinating. So, how long have you been involved in the biblical giving project? You've been doing
So
this for a
this is
while.
Yeah, so just this is kind of my major focus has been a 4 year process. It really started with this idea of learning about this, really starting with the passage in 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19 that commands a ministry to the rich. And I really wanted to find out what did that mean originally? Because I certainly don't see that in the modern churches. I mean, we've got all sorts of specialized ministries, right? You've got youth ministers and seniors ministers and ministers to divorced people or cowboys or ex-convicts or
You
but
name
I've
it,
never
we've got
you
it.
name it except but I've never walked into a church and somebody says, "Hi, I'm Bob. I'm the minister to the rich. I work with the rich people in our church," right? And so to me, I thought, okay, well, there's this disconnect between what Scripture is saying, which I mean, First Timothy, that's all about how to set the church up, and what we're doing. So it really led to this exploration of what was the real first century meaning of this concept of the ministry to the rich. And as I spent more time with it and doing that deep dive word study and all of the language studies and looking at every commentary that's ever said anything about this verse over, hundreds of years, it came to be really surprising for me that as we looked at those words, and in many cases, Paul creates brand new words just for that passage, the meaning of those words really fit with exactly what works in major gifts fundraising today. That it was these same concepts that, for example, this wasn't income sharing. This was talking about wealth and wealth sharing with the wealth holders. And in terms of what kind of opportunities were these wealth holders being offered. Nowhere does it say give your money. Instead, it says that we use this wealth to make an impact, right? To do good, to be rich in good works. And the meaning of those is to actually do something that makes a difference, that in the first case is intrinsically good, but then with the second word, which is a different word, it's talking about creating something that is beautifully good, that is visible, noble, inspirationally good. And so as we sort of dive into that, then more and more, the idea was these ideas that you and I talk about as being so powerful, so effective in major gifts philanthropy, they're not new. That this was 2,000 years old. And sometimes these are missed because, well, frankly, the people that are doing the translation have no idea how major gifts fundraising works. But if you said those same phrases in their original context to people who know how major gift fundraising works, They would explain it very directly. Yes, this is how you do this in major gifts philanthropy. So for me, it was quite the journey to discover how this original phrasing, this original language actually matched what we see in modern research that works for major gifts philanthropy.
Well, in the church, um, there is there's a lot of negativity attached with being wealthy, as you know.
Absolutely.
And as a result of that, most fundraising, if you want to call it that,
Hmm.
within the faith communities is really all about income.
Hmm.
They don't really get into anything else. In fact, I know you're familiar with Henry Nouwen's book,
Sure.
Spiritual Fundraising. And
Hmm.
here's Henry saying, "Well, I had to get over my angst against the rich. I had to get over that."
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I was in at Vanderbilt, I belonged to the Baptist Student Union,
Hmm.
and the chaplain there, I'll never forget him. What a great guy this guy was. He was not your typical Bible banging Southern Baptist. He was
Okay.
pretty enlightened. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And of course, he was at Vanderbilt, and so they wouldn't have tolerated some of that other stuff. But anyway, he used to say to me, Larry, they're the down and outs, but they're also the up and outs. And that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what he's talking about. And
Mm-hmm.
in my working with high net worth individuals, they have the same struggles, trials, and challenges that people with less do. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
little bit easier to camouflage. That's
Mm-hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, as you say, the church does these people the disfavor and an injustice by not including them and helping them. What's the word I'm looking for? And helping them be fulfill the stewardship they would like to fulfill.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, and I think you point out a good reason why we see this directive that says you're supposed to have this special ministry reaching out to this people group, because there are special needs, special concerns that come along with this people group. And once we start to think of it that way, and honestly, I'll tell folks like treat this like reaching out to any other people group. Let's
mhm,
say if I were to say to you, you want to have a ministry to ex-convicts, okay? Well, how would you do that? Well, you got to find them first, right? Maybe you
mhm.
would offer some programs that are particularly helpful for that group. Maybe you learn a little bit more about what challenges they're facing, and you don't approach that by saying, well, I haven't ever served prison time. I don't need to learn about prison or what it's like to be an ex-convict. That's not my No, that's not how ministry works, right?
No,
We
no, it isn't.
find out about them and their world and what's important to them and reach out to them by being helpful to those things. So in the same way, when might talk to somebody in ministry and say, well, these are some issues that asset holders are facing, right? I want to talk about capital gains taxes and various other sort of investment. Oh no, I don't want to deal with that. The idea of saying I don't want to learn any of this because I'm not wealthy, it's that same notion. Like, no, no, that's not how we reach out to a people group. We find out about what is of concern to them. And then once you spend some time and start having some empathy, some understanding of the people group, it makes you a better minister to them. I mean, to
Oh yeah.
recognize how easy is it to become isolated when you have wealth? Because look, let's say you
Oh,
need a project done. If you don't have wealth, you got to reach out, friends, family members, people in the church, whatever. Hey, I need help. If you got wealth, you just write a check, right? And then if you've got wealth and other people know it, I don't know. Can you really trust them? Do they like me? Or are they
mhm.
just trying to get my money? So this.
Well, see, and that is one of the reasons why many significant donors want to remain out of the limelight.
Mhm,
It puts a target on their back.
mhm,
Russell's got money. Let's go ask him.
mhm.
You know, um, and then there's this whole idea that somehow you would give them money simply on the basis that you have it. I mean, come on. But they would
Right.
never do that. But they'd expect you to do that. You see,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
is keep going. So you were saying,
Yeah. Yeah. So this idea is understanding this is a special people group. It requires a special ministry that's specifically described in Scripture. And if we do a deep dive into the words, it says exactly how you go about this. What is the message that you're delivering? What is the challenge you're delivering? What are the results of that challenge? And this is so different from what we see in the teaching in the church today in this sense. So if you look at what you might call stewardship or financial ministry teaching in the church today, it is almost exclusively focused, one, as you've mentioned, on income sharing, not
Yes.
wealth and wealth sharing, but it's focused on a specific kind of bad stewardship. Now,
Mm-hmm.
there are two kinds of bad stewards in the New Testament. There is the binging bad steward. That's the one that uses it to party and get drunk and abuses his fellow servants.
The
But
consumptive
Jesus,
living.
yeah, but Jesus actually told more stories about the burying bad steward, the
Mm-hmm.
one who just takes it, protects it, hides it, puts it away in a napkin, buries it in the ground, sticks it in a barn, and just dies with it. We don't have conversations when it comes to stewardship about being the bearing bad steward. All of our teaching is around not being the binging bad steward. Hey, get
Consumptive.
control of your credit cards, get on a budget so that you can then have something to share with the church. And that's great. But this whole section of teaching is left off. We're not teaching about the bearing bad steward. And also, we don't have a specific ministry to the rich, ministry to the wealth holders. So this whole piece seems to be missing from that financial or stewardship teaching. And you know what, Larry? We see it in the data. Now, I'm a data guy. You know that.
Oh, I
I
know the
do.
numbers, man. And for somebody
I,
who's not a mathematician, you're quite the numbers guy. You
Well, I,
know,
I I appreciate that. Let me give you this quick comparison, just to
please
give you a
do.
sense of the impact that this is having. Now, if we look at normal nonprofit organizations, okay, so we're looking at this is data from over 12,000 charities across the country. Now, in those organizations, the top donors, so this is about the top 1/3 of 1% of donors, those top donors provide about half of the money. Okay, it was 51% in 2023, 52% in 2024.
This is the top
Now,
10%.
this is the top 0.3%. So
Okay.
this is the really big donors, right? So this is the top third of the top 1%. Okay.
Okay.
Now, that's what normal fundraising looks like. That top group is going to provide 52% of the dollars. Now, what does that look like in giving to churches? Well, we worked with a software company that does the church fundraising software. That top group doesn't provide 52% of the dollars, they provide 14% of the dollars.
Whoa.
So what's missing are big gifts from the high capacity donors. We also see this in the national estate tax data. So here are two opposite contrasts in the estate tax data. As wealth increases, okay, the likelihood that somebody is going to include a religious organization in their estate plan with a gift goes up and up and up. So that's good news for religious organizations. But here's the thing. As wealth increases, the share of charity, of charitable giving that goes to religious organizations goes down and down and down. So, what that tells us is that religious organizations are good at getting small gifts, but they're even good at getting small gifts from wealthy donors, but they're really bad at getting large gifts. And those large gifts are missing, but also this ministry to the wealth holders, it's also missing. So there is a connection between those things that we see both in the data and in how there's a mismatch between what scripture says and what we tend to be doing and teaching.
This is fascinating. I'm just thinking of experiences in my own career. I'll tell you a little story. This
Yeah.
happened in central Ohio 25, 30 years ago, at least. You know, one of those kind of mid-sized Ohio towns, good solid communities, usually one or two manufacturing companies and all the services that go with that. Well, there was a man there that owned, I forget what the business was, but it was a services business, and it
Mhm.
was very solid. And he was I guess you call them deacons in the Methodist Church on
Mhm.
the ruling board. And he was at the same congregation for decades,
Mhm.
and his wife preceded him in death, and so that it was really just him. And the assumption by the minister of the Methodist Church was that they were going to be the beneficiary of his estate, pretty much.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. Well, he passed, and then the minister gets a call from the attorney that's probating or executing the estate, and he says to him, "So, Bill, I want you to come over here and talk about Jim's estate." "Oh yes." Bill was okay. "No, no, you need to come over here now. We need to talk about this." "All right." Well, you'll love this: wealth
Uh-huh.
versus income.
Mhm.
Um, During the last 2 or 3 months of his life, he was in hospice before he died. Within a month or two of his passing, he got an interesting visitor. He got a visitor who was the Monsignor of the Jesuit high school he attended.
Mhm.
No one knew he ever went to a Catholic high school. Uh, Jesuits, as you know, are very good fundraisers. They're probably the Catholic Church's best, actually, from what I know.
Mhm.
This father approached this man and used the wealth approach with him. It's
Mhm.
exactly what he did. You will have greater impact doing this. Boom, 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 boom. He did the ministry to the man. That's
Mhm.
what he did. So the man changed
Mhm.
his will, gave everything to Catholic high school. Bingo.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then the group that had assumed and not really ministered to the man, you see, were left holding the bag, proverbial bag. They got maybe, a few shekels. It's
Mhm.
exactly what you're telling me.
Mhm.
One of the groups, the Jesuit, said, "Listen, let's talk about your wealth. Let's
Yeah.
talk about how God has gifted you and what's
Mhm.
important." And the other one was
Mhm.
just expecting more or less a handout because that's the way they thought. Um, and you see that a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. So, that is certainly just a great example of how, and in the Biblical Fundraiser, it's a couple of books. One's called The Biblical Fundraiser in Modern Practice, and one's called The Biblical Fundraiser in Ancient Words, depending upon how deep of a dive you want to take. It brings out not only that we're having wealth conversations, but actually the word that's used there for instruct is referencing constant, continuing, ongoing, repetitive instruction. It's not a one and done sort of message.
Mm,
It's an ongoing ministry, and it's a ministry about wealth. Here's one other thing that I think changes the way that we have these conversations that fits exactly into how you're teaching people to be effective in this space. And before kind of doing a deep dive on the word, I want to share a story of a really effective major gifts fundraiser. And he told me, he said, one time I was on a plane sitting next to a lady and, talking about, well, what do you do? And I shared with her what I did. And her response was, oh, I could never do that. I couldn't ask people for money. And he said, I don't ask people for money. I ask people to do things that happen to cost money. So the notion that
yes, yes, yes.
yeah, okay. Now, let me compare this with the language that Paul is using in this 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19 passage. He is instructing them to enjoy what God has blessed them with, and then he gives them the ways to do it. It's for enjoyment. The first one is to do good. Well, that's actually, it means to do good work. It means to accomplish something that is intrinsically good. And then it says to be rich in good works. Well, this is about making a difference in the world that is beautiful and is noble and makes the donor feel like they are rich in good works. This is not saying give us money because we're so wonderful. It is saying make an impact by work. Literally, that word for work is repeated twice in this to do good, to be rich in good works. It is the by work that makes a an intrinsic impact or brings beauty into the world, right? That's how we should be approaching this. Nowhere in this passage does it say give your money, right? It says use your money to make this kind of an impact. And that's exactly that same notion when we start approaching fundraising by saying, I don't ask people for money.
No,
I ask people to do good things that happen to cost money. That's the same language that's 2,000 years old. It's not about asking people to give money. It's about asking people to make this impact with their money.
you know, when I, well, I don't do direct donor work now, but when I did,
Sure.
and I was working directly with donors, and I was, getting to know them, and one of the early questions I would ask them, I'd say, "So, Russell, what is it you want to accomplish?"
Hmm.
A very open-ended question, and I would
Hmm.
just listen and let the conversation go wherever they wanted it to go.
Hmm.
And that told me a lot of things: what was really on their mind, what was important to them, what sort of accomplishment they wanted to see happen. And then, of
Hmm.
course, my job representing a particular organization or institution was to somehow figure out if there's a match between those things, if I can offer them something that would fulfill what they're looking for. Have we talked about money? No. All right.
Hmm.
And then the money is really an afterthought. And in fact, in my personal experience, the funds that were ultimately transferred were generally far larger in amount than what would have been just what's known as a straight ask for money, you see, because whatever it costs, they want to see it happen. And if
Hmm.
it's within their means, they'll do it because that's what they want. And so it's the same sort of thing. We're called to do great things. And you say, what was it? Each donor has something else on their heart.
And here's the thing that just blows me away is that that process that you are describing is actually mandated by the original Greek words. Because where we just pass over that to be rich in good works, well, that's a special kind of good. It's not just good, worthy, honorable, noble, and seen to be so, but it is a word that means it is good that reflects the inward good character of the person. So this idea, and I mean, that's literally just taken from the Greek lexicon. Okay. So the idea of finding what are those positive aspects of the inward character of the person that can be expressed in this beautiful good work. That's the process that you just described. And that's the identical language to what Paul is describing here for this ministry to the rich. In fact, that whole passage, which is all one sentence in the original Greek, it starts with their history, their values, their people connections, and uses those as a motivation to say, this is why you will be compelled to do these special kind of good work. So to be rich in good works, using that Greek word, your good works will necessarily be different than
From
mine
someone else's.
because your inward character is different from mine, and so the expressions are supposed to be different.
So, give just for the purposes of the readers, of the listeners, what is the full reference in Timothy? First Timothy, what?
So it's 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. Now, again, it's all one long sentence. In the Greek, it's oftentimes broken up in the English, but that's the emphasis or the lens through which the biblical fundraiser books are looking at both the historical ministry of major gifts fundraising and how we do that in a modern, practical way.
Now, are both of these books available publicly?
Yes. So if you like the book version, that's on Amazon or on Audible, but I share all my stuff for free. And so if you go to encouragegenerosity.com, that's where every book I've ever written related to fundraising is on there. The PDFs are free.
And
So
what's the URL again? Inspire
it's
Generosity?
encourage
Encourage.
generosity. Yeah, encourage generosity. Or, if you connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email, I can send them to you that way.
Well, you're a very generous person, Russell. You always have been. Um, but um, So this is I'm just trying to, so was any of this sort of a real revelation to you?
Each step in the process actually fell into that category. And by step in the process, I mean each step was just going word by word in this passage. What does that word mean? How does it connect to every other passage that uses that word in the New Testament? How
Hmm.
does it connect with the history of Greek history and contemporary Roman history? And that deep dive at each stage so strongly connected with what for decades I've been finding in empirical research and listening to people who have the actual experience and success in the field. It just fit with that so
Hmm.
perfectly at each phrase, each step along the way. It was almost as if the passage was inspired.
Almost. uh, I like to tell people, there was a friend of mine, a really nice guy, but it illustrates the same guy. He's my he's my good old boy buddy, my shooting buddy, and you know I served in Pellegrino for the first time, and he wasn't aware that this was mineral water that came out of the ground already carbonated, and he
Mhm.
was like, "Whoa! I mean, the gas comes out." Well, Kevin, my experience is anything that man's thought of, God thought of it first.
Well, that's what I like to call my presentation the 2,000-year-old best practices in major gifts fundraising because it's not new.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, this is going to be great. People are going to love this. It's the Biblical Fundraiser. That's the book, correct?
Yes,
And I'm a big book guy. I'll have to get one. Um, uh,
wonderful.
and so, what's next on your plate, Russell? Going to share anything with
Yeah.
us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the newest thing, and hoping this will be out in the next few months, is actually this series, a biblical fundraiser, obviously is focused on fundraisers. But the next series, which takes the same information, is just focused on the wealth holder in the church. And so that series is called Joyful Wealth Management. So the Joyful Wealth Management, it's a short book, also a Bible study discussion guide. And in fact, there's a new podcast series coming out, Joyful Wealth Management, that the K-Love, the radio company, is hosting on their platform. That should be out in the next few weeks as well. And so that's taking some of these ideas, but not talking to the fundraiser, instead talking to the person in the church of what does this scripture mean about how to manage our wealth. So yeah, joyful wealth management, that's what's coming up. Those some of those pieces are out already. Again, they're also free at encouragegenerosity.com, or you can just type in Joyful Wealth Management on Amazon if you want the paper version. And the rest of those pieces should be out really within the next few months.
Okay. All right. Well, you're just one busy person. I tell you, anybody that can take a 4-week vacation and still accomplish this, wow. Wow. Thank you again, Russell.
Been
Very,
great
very
talking with
much.
you. It always is, Larry. Thank
Well,
you.
it always is. Everyone, we've been having a delightful discussion with Russell James, one of my good buddies in the fundraising world, and we think so much alike. I love that. But he brings the validation, the empirical validation to things that I've known for via experience, but he brings the data behind it, and it's refreshing to see that it's all confirming. So I want to thank him again. There'll be someone new, I think, next week, Mondays when these come out, and so until then, thank you for sharing your time with us today.